YouTube takes a minute. Okay. Okay, welcome everyone to this book reading representing ourselves, Queer Short Stories with Jared Campbell and Matthew Lansford. Please give it up for our authors. My name is Greg Newton. I'm the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum. We're being helped by our volunteer, Mikey, today, Mikey Friedman, and that is how we roll, volunteers and donations. So we do ask for donations, especially if you know you won't be buying a book. We'd love it if you could drop something in the bag or on Venmo. So I'll pass the bag around. There's a QR code on the back. I won't pass it to the authors. And for those of you online, if you'd like to make a donation, you can do that at Venmo at BGSQD. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room or on our website, bgsqd.com. And you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. We keep quite a busy calendar here at the Bureau, lots of events. And what else did I want to say? Oh, our regular business hours are Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we often stay open later when we have evening events. But on weekends, we like a nice post-brunch, relaxed afternoon event. So thanks for coming inside on a gorgeous, lovely day. And before I introduce Jared and Matthew, I just wanted to read a land acknowledgement and a statement of solidarity with the people of Palestine. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. And Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, so what better time to sign up? I also want to read a statement of solidarity with the Palestinian people. As queer people, we know the pain of being cast out. We have been and continue to be despised by many, even by our own parents, families, and communities of origin. This reality evokes in many of us a deep empathy with others who are likewise seen not as fully human, but as problems to be solved, questions for which the answer is ultimately elimination and erasure. As we watch the ongoing genocide of Palestinians by the State of Israel, carried out with the full support of our government and funded by our tax dollars, we witness the inevitable results of defining people solely as a threat to the safety and well-being of those deemed inherently worthy of life. This horror compels us to speak out not only against the current bombardment and siege of Gaza by the State of Israel, but against the historical and ongoing violent displacement of Palestinians by Zionists and the conditions of occupation and apartheid under which Palestinians have been forced to live for over 75 years. In our longing for a very different reality, we draw inspiration from the words of Jose Esteban Munoz. Queerness is essentially about a rejection of the here and now and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibility of another world. And that's from his book, Cruising Utopia, which he published in 2009, which I highly recommend. All right, so let me introduce our authors. Jared Campbell is a writer living in the Northern Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C. His fictions, essays, reviews, and poetry have appeared in Heavy Feather Review, Northwest Review, Modern Literature, Wicked Gay Ways, and Boner World. Pretty excellent. His collection of short stories, The Reason I'm Here, Was listed as an anticipated June LGBTQI plus read by Lambda Literary. And Matthew Landsberg's collection of linked stories, Outside is the Ocean, won the Iowa Short Fiction Award and was a finalist for the 30th Annual Lambda Literary Award and the Farrow Brumley Award for LGBTQ fiction. His fiction has appeared in journals such as One Story, VQR, New England Review, Glimmer Train, Ecotone, Epic, Alaska Quarterly Review, Electric Literature, Story Quarterly, Columbia Journal, Guernica, and Michigan Quarterly Review, and has been shortlisted in the Best American Short Stories series in 2018 and 2022, and the Pushcart Prize series in 2017. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Second here situated. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. So, yes. So, first of all, I would like to thank everybody for being here. It really means a lot to be able to share the space and this time to read with everybody. Thank you very much, Matthew, for reading with me as well. It's an honor to read with you. So for me, representing ourselves in queer fiction in particular, it's always been important to me because I feel in the past, we necessarily haven't been portrayed by ourselves or haven't had much agency in how we portray ourselves. So then you had writers like James Baldwin, Yukio Mishima, Jean Genet, people like this who came along to offer different, sometimes often difficult examples of queer life, which certainly gave me the idea that, writing about difficult people or situations, there is a place for that, which was very important for me as a young writer, as a kid growing up in particular. So for me, I've always been drawn to very difficult characters, unreliable narrators, bad gays, to quote the wonderful podcast that we all love. And I often try to explore different, sometimes difficult, unpopular situations and opinions in literature and what I write. So what I'm going to read to you today basically is I've always been fascinated by the intersection of how somebody can be genuinely nice, kind, forthcoming, and then all of a sudden just act very much out of character, misbehave, just do something completely out of left field. So that intersection has always fascinated me. So in my story that I'm going to read to you guys today, it's called Boys Being Boys. Our main character, James, finds himself in kind of a very similar situation and at a very similar crossroads. Taylor Dane understood, and her timing was uncanny. She sang her shared hope for a lover over the low din of conversations between mostly coupled people. A delivery wasn't guaranteed for James, but the song's message came as a sign. His friends predicted the rest of his life would be spent staring into the bottom of glass. They had been right for the past 2.5 years, and each day made it easier for James to make it an eventual truth. He laughed at the thought as he tilted his head back to get the last drop of beer stubbornly tucked into the bottom crease. The thicker glass of the base glorified the colorful hues of the overhead lights. When the inside was completely dry, James closed his left eye, put the glass to his open right eye, and surveyed the room. Everybody looked still except for their mouths that barely moved, humming like soft electricity. Then Eddie walked through the door. Stumbled was more accurate. A slow shuffle moved him with caution to the closest empty seat at the bar, right next to James. An alarmed bartender stared at him suspiciously upon the simultaneous approach to James's left. Looks like you've had a few too many already. I'm going to call you a cab. No, Terry, no, he's with me, James said. The Uber just dropped him off. Let us have at least one drink before he heads out. Yeah, Terry, let us have at least one drink before I head out, the stranger slurred. Okay, but he's your responsibility. If he gets out of hand at all, you're both out. I still don't think I should serve him. The stranger leapt to his feet, startling anybody who cared to look. The perfect contender for a bootleg Marlon Brando, a tight, plain white t-shirt and well-worn denim jeans clung to his brutish, muscled body. Half of an angelic face snarled and hid behind a lush, dark mustache and beard. Curious brown eyes challenged anyone who stared long enough to extend any amount of sympathy. Reliance on those aspects alone was not enough to impress the onlookers. A macho show of sobriety offered proof he could handle at least one more drink. Dropping to the floor, he began a series of one-armed push-ups. With his free hand, he touched the tip of his nose, then extended the arm and brought it back again to touch the tip of his nose. The rhythm matched the one arm raising and lowering of his body, each action marked by the letter from the alphabet Z backwards to A. So, Terry, he said once back in his seat, give me a shot of whiskey and a glass of whiskey, and my buddy here is going to pay for it. I had to get the Uber. An eager nod from James temporarily assuaged Terry's concerns. Thanks for that, the stranger said. My name is Eddie. You should know that so our story sounds more convincing. I'm James, and I should thank you, James said in reference to Eddie's demonstration. The compliment missed its mark. Strike one, James lamented, and I only just learned his name. Nah, thank you for the whiskey. I'll be out of your hair in a bit. Stay and talk for a while if you like, James insisted and hoped it didn't come off too eager. Well, whiskey ain't cheap in DC, so sure, I owe you at least a few minutes of chit-chat. More if you want. Don't worry about Terry kicking you out unless you got someone waiting for you someplace else. Eddie exploded with laughter as Terry returned with the shot glass and the tumbler of whiskey. Nope, no place to go, got kicked out tonight. I think it's really legit this time. The shot glass was expertly emptied down his throat and slammed back down on the bar as an exclamation point. James saw it as a physical expression of Eddie's accepting defeat. What are you going to do then, he inquired. Get a hotel, I guess. You don't have any friends? That would be cheaper. Well, our friends were her friends, not mine, and all my friends stopped talking to me after we started dating. James heard nothing but an insignificant string of words draped like an ugly necklace around her neck. His deepest desire in hearing about her was that Eddie would tighten the necklace around her neck like a garrote and squeeze it until he choked all of the breath from her lungs. Most of what Eddie said about his girlfriend and the possible demise of their relationship went unheard. You still with me, Eddie asked, jerking James back into the conversation. Never mind, it don't matter. I'll finish my whiskey and get going. With that, Eddie tilted his head and hand back and with a might 2 swallows, emptied the tumbler of whiskey into his gut. Eddie offered a nod of thanks before he rose from the bar stool to turn and walk back out into the night. He only made it a few steps along the short path to the door when he stumbled and fell face first a mere feet before the entrance. James jumped to his feet. I got him. Put it on my tab, Terry. Come back tomorrow and pay, James, Terry demanded before the clamor from the curious onlookers rose to make any conversation inaudible. Eddie's bulk was difficult for James's lanky frame to lift. The drunken dead weight became a terrifying burden to support. It would be best to try and revive him, but how would he wake Eddie? He was afraid to slap him, fearful of some half-expected violent retaliation. A glass of water poured from over James's shoulder and splashed in Eddie's face. Terry smiled with accepted guilt before walking back behind the bar. Eddie's eyes fluttered open, but no other motion followed at first. After a moment of looking around to get his bearings, he picked himself off the floor in a flash of sobriety. Another moment was needed to acclimate and take in what he effectively could of his surroundings. Embarrassment kept him silent as he slowly walked the rest of the way to the door from where he had fallen. I got him, James said pointlessly, since by then nobody cared about this situation anymore. Ice clinking in an empty glass brought Eddie around. The noise pounded in his head and he winced at the light as it poured in through the cracks of his barely shut eyes. Where the hell am I? He wondered to himself, but loud enough for James to hear. The voice asking thundered and dealt a cleaving blow to his brain. Thinking hurt. Opening his eyes only made the aching worse. Back with us? Eddie shut his eyes again, but kept his mouth open, hoping more oxygen held the power to heal. The loud reverberation of heavy glass colliding with heavier glass sounded in front of him. He opened his eyes to a glass of water light with ice. This ain't what I want, Eddie slurred. But it's what you're going to get, James returned. Defeated by the authoritative tone of the response, Eddie guzzled the water, enjoying the refreshment in secret. Now give me a real drink, Eddie asked more than demanded. James took the empty glass away, then returned with it again filled with water. 2 glasses of water per real drink. I don't want you choking on your own vomit once you pass out. But it's okay that I piss all over your couch? Better than you dying on my couch. The logic defeated Eddie's inebriated attempt at refusing the water, so he once more gave in, thinking only of the drink that was sure to follow. To his delight, a whiskey and soda, heavier on the whiskey, came to him in a chilled tumbler. The first sips Eddie savored, but the rest he poured down his throat. After a minute, the spirit possessed his limbs to make them numb and relaxed while his brain warmed and cooled at the same time. Condensation and clouds grayed his already overcast mind, but it's what he preferred and wanted. Something terrible needed forgetting, and he had succeeded, feeling only the couch beneath him and the sleepiness that started its deliberate wash. Eddie soon would drown in something other than regret, pain, and anger. He welcomed its quick undertow and was swept away at last in slumber's drink. James stared at Eddie with intent. The beautiful man lay sprawled across the entire length of the couch. James sat across from the sleeping beauty and pondered, first about how to make his guest comfortable as he eyed the blankets stacked behind the couch. Eddie's face appeared flushed and his brow damp. Blankets were out of the question. Then James thought to undress Eddie. Nerve-rattled limbs needed something soothing. James stood up, anxiously paced for a minute, and grabbed the tumbler from the table that once held Eddie's whiskey soda. The first shot of straight liquor went down rough, scorching a trail of repentance down the back of his throat and down into his stomach. The next shot was intended to calm his trembling extremities, but instead only encouraged another shot, along with a minor bump in ordinary courage. His head felt light, so he sat for a moment, again across from Eddie. The rhythmic raising and lowering of the sleeping man's chest became the focus of James's own breathing. Their matched respiration lent James a deceptive sense of familiarity, of a closeness that never existed. That can be changed, James thought. He stood up and sat in the only accommodating space for himself on the couch near Eddie's hip. The closer proximity intoxicated an already fascinated imagination. The continued rising and falling of the drunk man's chest stretched the white cotton of his t-shirt. With their breaths again matching, James felt comfortable helping Eddie out of the confines of the restricting garment. The shirt peeled off with ease. Drunken heaviness held no difficulty for fixed intention. With care, James placed his hand on Eddie's chest to feel his heartbeat, slow and steady compared to his own, which raced twice as fast. Heat transferred from skin to skin, and James wanted to feel more mingling of the warmth. Removing his own shirt, he nestled himself into the side of the sleeping body with its arms raised and inviting. Within seconds, the warmth amplified, and both bodies perspired into a collective dampness. Standing up made James aware that his thighs also produced an uncomfortable sweat. He removed his pants quickly. The fictional conjoining of feeling convinced him that Eddie must also have the same dilemma. Sweaty palms pressed against either side of James's head to squeeze the tension and trepidation out. He'll sleep better, the drunken brain decided. With the same care and relative ease, the tight blue jeans came off the unconscious man. A satisfied sigh persuaded James that he did the right thing. Another shot of alcohol later, and James remembered why he went to the bar in the first place. The objective was never to get drunk, but to bring home a guy. Too many months had passed since James had any kind of sex. Across from him, half naked on his couch, rested the most beautiful man he'd seen in a while. Lean muscle gave shape to the arms, legs, chest, and torso blanketed in a pelt of dark fur. Expertly cut hair faded into a well-kept beard and mustache. Eddie's white briefs bulged suggestively to match the mounds of muscle geography. But Eddie was straight, and recently out of a relationship, and completely passed out, and absolutely beautiful. James hated that his mind went where it did, wondering how far either of them considered too far, drunk or otherwise. There existed between them no intimacy other than first names. More than enough for a gay man to have sex with another gay man. How much could James get away with under the justification of boys being boys? Did straight people subscribe to the casualness of sex with the same rampant epidemic fervor? Throughout those and the many quandaries that followed, the concept of consent never entered the discussion. Certainly that notion wielded a heft that also carried potential legal retribution. In the end, Eddie became only a man to James, flesh and blood tinting both of their underwear. What would Eddie do in a similar situation with an object of desire ready and easy to have, certain to remember nothing in the morning? James couldn't help but wonder. One final tiny shot from the same glass that knocked Eddie out felt like a kiss from his lips. The liquid courage made James certain that one tiny brush against the real thing with his own would be better than the sticky imprint on a glass. He sat close to Eddie's barely clad waist and gently leaned in for a brief kiss. For a straight man, Eddie had soft lips, so another got stolen and locked away in a brain doomed never to properly remember. Swooning, James braced himself with one arm against the back of the couch. His arm hovered over the sleeping body with the rising and falling of its labored life as proof of a desire for relief. James swore a heat could be felt charring the air between the air and space between his limb and Eddie. He also swore to a sureness about much of the situation. Alcohol and desire made so much of the situation vague, flashes of black hair growing from pale skin on fire, the feel of flesh beneath fabric, the dark lettering of a common brand name printed around a waistband, more skin, more dark fur, and from what James determined, no opposition. But something stopped James, the what less important than the why. He knew the solution and situation then would know only two ends. passed out somewhere, or happy and face first in Eddie's lap. Drunk but amazed at how well the liquor held in his stomach, the drink kept him glistening in a truthful selfishness, and one more tiny shot of whiskey called the decision. Heat rose to his head, and he barely made it into the chair before his legs gave out and buckled. The only way of conveyance between the small space separating him and his man for the night demanded it be traversed on all fours in both subjugation and genuflection. Preserving any concept of what happened afterwards was also made hopeless by a light head on fire. James woke first and surveyed the room with eyes unusually adjusted for clear perception. The brain, however, stayed sluggish and processed little. What exactly happened? No messes needed tending to, and nothing smelled out of sorts. More of the floor's hardness forced the parts of his body in contact with the timbers to match the supporting stiffness. Sitting up proved more difficult than necessary, standing upright nearly unmanageable. Blood and color drained from his head. James immediately returned to a seated position. He landed with little grace on a sliver of couch unoccupied by his still slumbering guest. With little of the night before remained intact. The single tumbler filled with a hardened puddle of whiskey rested overturned on the table. With the sight of it came the smell, and with the smell came no recollection like James hoped. Looking over his right shoulder, he had a close viewpoint of Eddie's hairy legs. Over his left laid a handsome face, quite still in spite of the rise and fall of Eddie's powerful chest. Suddenly, James remembered the hypnotic motion of Eddie's breathing a trigger. No memories of action sprang to mind, just leftover sensations of lust. A reticent smile barely had time to play on James's face before Eddie began to stir. The proximity of the stranger so close to him startled Eddie. His head and body ached too much for a physical response, but the look on his face said enough. The man sitting next to his body stood up to give him more room to stretch and acclimate. Questions poured in to labor his head even more. What to ask first? Which was more important? Who or where? James's initiative to speak first pleased Eddie. Once the who and where became established, the why and what clamored to be understood next. A quick glimpse at his cell phone explained the why. Now, Eddie thought, what the fuck happened? Why were we both in our underwear, hungover, and so fucking close together on the couch when I woke up? Volatile head and stomach aches warned that nothing would be learned without help from James. The host presented the evening's events the best he could. Most of what James evoked from after the deluge of whiskey received its information from impression alone, not actual memory. But James spoke first. Eddie asked with sheepish insecurity, or before James spoke again, Eddie asked with sheepish insecurity, "Did you do anything gay to me while I was passed out?" The manner of delivery contradicted the strength surely coiled in Eddie's burly, muscled body. The question knocked out any interest James had in him to tease or provoke the big, half-naked straight boy on his couch. No proof manifested from a hasty examination of thoughts and any available physical evidence. Both woke up still in their underwear. Neither bore telltale stains or signs of distress. James could only speculate at the briny taste noticed in spurts whenever his tongue moved around the inside of his mouth. Absolutely not, James assured Eddie, who became instantly, though only momentarily, relieved. Later, dressed and full-bellied, Eddie thought more about the future than whatever happened in the past while he talked over coffee with James. "Where will you go?" James asked. "I really don't know," Eddie admitted. "All my friends were her friends. Can't go to any of them and ask for a place to stay, so a motel, I guess. I mean, you could stay here." Eddie looked at James with a hint of mistrust. "I don't really know you, man." "True, but I'm trustworthy. I brought you here and took care of you. I could have left you at the bar when Terry wanted to kick you out." "True, but why? What did you get out of doing all of that?" "The chance to do a good deed, the chance to make a friend." A let-up in the back and forth prodded Eddie into re-examining his previous state of undress. After hesitation, he asked, "Did you take my clothes off last night?" "I'm asking because I usually don't sleep in my underwear. I sleep naked." With no reluctance of his own, James confirmed he did. Eddie followed up with, "Why?" "You were burning up and sweating through your shirt." "But you knew I wasn't gay, right?" "You made that very clear, yes." "Okay, good." With a satisfied smile, James changed the subject back to temporary cohabitation, his tension unnoticed. "Besides, staying here for a week or so will help you save money. I won't charge you." "What? No way. What do you get out of doing that now?" "The chance to do an even better deed and the chance to become a better friend." Eddie thought about the offer and weighed the options. A face that could become more familiar held greater appeal than the dismal solitude of a motel room. That threatened too much introspection, and Eddie had no need for that then, at least not for a week or so. He agreed, pleased and swayed in the end with the money to be saved from 7+ days of free room and board. I don't have a lot of stuff, Eddie admitted, also mentioning all the furniture and appliances belonged to his ex. Just clothes, mostly. When can I bring them over? Anytime. Do you have a car? Yeah. Want to do it now? Sooner is really better than later. Yeah, sure. Okay, I have an extra parking pass. I can take you to your car if you want. Maybe not a good idea. It should be back at my ex's if she didn't have it towed. I'll take an Uber. They walked together to the front door of James's apartment. An awkward moment passed that ended in a failed hug and near fumbled handshake. Okay, see you soon, Eddie said. I'll be here. Eddie started to pivot towards the door with his back fully turned to James for the first time in memory. He needed confirmation one last time. You know I'm not gay and nothing gay is going to happen between us, right? James nodded in agreement, and Eddie, placated at last, smiled and turned to leave. Before closing the door, he announced, I'm going to get us a bottle of whiskey to celebrate a new friendship. James concealed the attitude that threatened to allow the reticence of his smile to fully form. Get two, he insisted. We killed my only bottle last night, and I'm sure we'll need to replace it sooner or later.
Okay, that's a very hard act to follow, because I'm sure we all want to know exactly what's going to happen on that second night together. I love that story. Thank you for reading it, Jared. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this event. It's such an honor. And thank you all for coming and for hosting the event. Really great to be here. I am going to read an excerpt from a short story called Last Night in Ventana Beach. The story was published a couple of years ago in Electric Literature, and it features a man named Stuart and Heike, his mother. There's no hot guys named Eddie in it. Heike is a German immigrant who has lived in the United States for most of her life. A lot of the work that I have written actually over the years, including this book, Outside is the Ocean, includes these characters. It's about sort of the complex and fraught relationship between Heike and Stuart. And Heike is a very complicated woman, as you'll see a little bit in this scene. And they're characters that I've continued to write about even after I published Outside is the Ocean. So this story takes place actually after Heike has died. She lives in Ventana Beach, California. Stuart lives in New York. He flies home to Ventana Beach to clean out her condo, to put it on the market. And at the beginning of the story, he is at Vons, a grocery store, sort of picking up a few cleaning supplies and a few food items. And he sees somebody in the store who looks very similar to Heike, his mother. And he thinks that's strange because she's dead, she's buried. He had her funeral 3 days earlier. And so they have an interaction, and it seems very much like his mother. He's very confused by this. He thinks it's maybe a hallucination. He forgets about it, goes back to the condo, meets with a real estate agent, and then this scene takes place. Stuart had just managed to open the condo's front door when he saw someone standing in the narrow hallway near the washer and dryer. Well, she seemed promising, Heike said. I liked her. My God, you scared me, Stuart nearly shouted. Although the house was getting darker, he was quite sure this was not a hallucination. What are you doing here? He'd recently switched SSRIs, and he wondered if that had been a mistake. I'm sorry, his mother replied. She was wearing the same tennis skirt and hot pink zip-up jacket she'd been wearing at Vons, but she no longer had on the visor or sunglasses. She held a banana peel in her hand and was chewing. I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to say hi and see what you thought of the agent. I thought she seemed nice. She had pretty crooked teeth for a real estate agent, but she had warm eyes. You're freaking me out. Aren't you supposed to be dead? I know. Don't worry. I'm not here to bother you. I know how you are about wanting your privacy. It's just a little boring up there in heaven. I got a pass to come down and pay you a visit. I can go back if you don't want me here. It's okay. You did your obligation. You threw me a nice funeral and put flowers on my grave. You shed your tears. I must say I was surprised, but it seemed genuine. He stared at her, not sure whether he should embrace her or call 911. Don't look so disturbed, she continued. I'm not here to pester you. My pass expires tonight at 9:30. I asked for an extension, but these angels are very strict. You know how it is. Everything up there is by the book. She nodded towards the popcorn ceiling. I'm not disturbed. I'm just surprised, Stuart managed. It's not, he struggled to find the right word, normal. Normal. What means normal? Nothing is ever normal. You think having me die of a stroke at the age of 79 is normal? I was a very healthy woman. I play tennis every day. Look how good my figure is, she said, directing his attention to various parts of her body. I told them my time hadn't come yet. I said they should at least give me a few more months so I can go skiing again to Mammoth or visit my family in Germany one last time, but they wouldn't budge. Stuart glanced at the banana peel she was holding. Want me to take that? I'm sorry, I hope you're not mad at me for snitching one of your bananas. I know how careful you are with your food. No, it's fine. Jesus, eat the banana. I don't care. Do you want an orange or some turkey breast? Are you sure you don't mind? She asked. I don't want to eat you dry. He told her she could have whatever she wanted, and soon enough they were in the kitchen and she was peeling one of the navel oranges with the little paring knife she used to use, then eating the fruit with her fingers. Delicious, she said, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. Now this is a juicy orange. Everything up there tastes horribly bland. You wouldn't believe it. You think in heaven the food would be great, but it's like chewing wet cardboard. They gave us a tiny bowl of fruit salad this morning and it tasted like airplane food. I almost sent it back, but you can't do that as a newcomer. You have to be just so or you end up getting a reputation. I can already tell there are cliques. There's a group of women who play canasta together and refuse to make eye contact with me. Very standoffish. Stuart thought about getting his iPhone and asking his mother whether he could make a video of her. It was something he'd been meaning to do while she was still alive, but he'd never gotten around to it. He knew everyone would think he'd lost it if he told them his mother had come back from the dead. He knew the only way they'd believe him was if he had proof. But he was worried that if he walked into the other room to get his phone, she might vanish again. On the other hand, he knew that something like this would generate an insane number of comments online. Did you hear me? She said. Are you listening? Yes, canasta. You said you were playing canasta. Ah, that was 5 minutes ago. I was telling you how constipated I was, not being able to exercise, and how I finally asked one of the angels whether they have any tennis courts. I went to see what they had, and it was ridiculous. 2 old courts with the worst nets you've ever seen and cracks everywhere. It was like East Germany. I told them, I can't just sit inside all day long listening to the radio and watching these old fogies play bingo. He started laughing. What's so funny? Why are you laughing at me? It's just so weird that you're here. I mean, don't you think it's bizarre? It's not bizarre. I lived through the war. I saw people starving to death. I ate grass for supper. Is that not bizarre? Now people spend all day looking at their phones and writing texts to each other. You think that's normal? I don't know. This is different. Ah, stop analyzing everything so much. You have me here now. Be grateful. Now you can give me a proper goodbye. He wasn't sure what she meant. Did she want a kiss? He'd always avoided kissing her on the lips, but he figured maybe he should stop being so squeamish. He wondered whether perhaps, this is like the Eddie gone wrong, right? He wondered whether perhaps she wanted him to take her to the Sizzler for surf and turf. I'm grateful, he said. I'm glad you're here. Let me get my phone so I can take a photo of you. No, no photos. My hair is a mess. You want to waste our precious time on photos? He told her hair looked great. He said he wanted a photo on his phone so he could remember her after she was gone. Okay, fine, she replied. But let me at least go to the ladies' room first and put on some rouge. As she walked away, he noticed that she hadn't taken off her shoes. She was wearing the tree torns she wore when she played tennis, despite the fact that she'd always forbidden people from wearing shoes in the house. He went back to the dining room where he'd begun filling trash bags with old placemats, along with the board games they played when he visited, and his mother's tchotchkes. The carved wooden shepherd, and the beer stein, and the framed Edelweiss she'd given him for his 15th birthday. He rescued the Edelweiss and the wood carving from the trash bag and put them back on the mantle. The last thing he needed was to have a fight with her now about which items he was keeping. When she came out of the bathroom, he was sitting on the couch. I hope it's okay I went big. I finally have to go. The toilet paper up there is like sandpaper. When she was still alive, this was the kind of comment he might have objected to. But now, here, he said, He was glad she was feeling better. He patted a place on the couch next to him and said he wanted to make a video of her. A video? Why a video? As a keepsake. But you don't have any children. Who are you going to show a video of your old mother to? I'm not even properly dressed. He promised not to show the video to anyone, though of course he was lying. He was always whoring around for more likes online. He told her he wanted her to yodel. He said he wanted to hear her tell him about the men she dated after his father divorced her, about Bob Kelly and Richard Chastain and the artist from Encinitas who sold spray-painted thistles on the beach. Soon enough, she was recounting stories he'd heard 1,000 times, telling him what it was like to grow up in Germany during the war and how she came to the United States to work as a maid when she was just 21, and about the men who tried to seduce her when she was still very innocent. Stuart held the phone up and made sure his mother's face was centered on the screen, trying not to jiggle his hands. He kept wanting to bring up their fight about the sweater, to apologize for not being more gracious and trying it on. He wanted to thank her for not disinheriting him, but he decided not to interrupt because she was on a roll. As Heike talked, he noticed he didn't feel any of the anxiety he experienced around her when she was still alive. Previously, when he visited her, he always felt on edge. He felt like a crock pot set on high that was ready to explode. Now, sitting on the couch with her, however, he felt something different. He didn't find his mother's presence suffocating anymore. He no longer felt consumed by the fear that she might become hysterical or unhinged. For whatever reason, she didn't seem to hold the same power over him. Was it simply that he no longer felt indebted to her? Was it that she no longer inhabited his world? Heike had been talking for close to an hour when she finally paused and said, "Okay, that's enough. Aren't you getting cold? It's like winter in here." It was dark now, except for the light in the kitchen. They were still sitting on the couch and Stuart had to pee. He stopped the recording and told his mother he'd be back in a second. "I'll get you a blanket," he said, and headed into the bathroom. He sat on the toilet because he'd reached the age where he found it easier to empty his bladder sitting down, and he felt the soles of his feet and the crown of his head coarse with light. A tingling sensation filled the roots of his teeth. He wondered whether she was going to ask him what he was planning to do with the money she'd left him, and whether she might try to extract some kind of promise. On his way back to the living room, he took the comforter off his mother's bed and jacked the thermostat up to 74. When he returned to the living room, the couch was empty and she was gone. "Mom," he called, "I got you a blanket." He waited for a reply, but the only sound he heard was the furnace lighting up. It was a sound he associated with wintertime and with being in bed, because when she was still alive, his mother had always avoided turning on the heater, except in the early morning in January and February, when the temperature indoors dipped into the 40s. This was a long time ago, when Heike was married to Jerry, and Stuart had fewer boundaries, back when he was in high school and college, and the future seemed expansive and open and hopeful. He sat on the couch and inhaled deeply, looking through the large panes of glass, past the little patch of astroturf onto the lake. Outside, the moon was bright, and he could hear the ducks in the water flapping and calling out. He looked at his phone to see whether he'd gotten any emails or texts, but nothing had come in. When he tried to look at the photos he'd just taken of his mother, all he saw was the living room shrouded in darkness. Even after he adjusted the brightness and contrast, she was still gone. He quickly located the video he'd recorded and pushed play, but again, he only saw blackness. It wasn't the blackness of the living room or the uneven darkness of shadows and night, but a more uniform blackness, something persistent and absolute. A few minutes earlier, just before he turned off his phone, she told him that when she was in the hospital at death's door, she'd been mad that he didn't visit her. But now that she was dead, she didn't feel angry anymore. "What does it really matter?" she said. "You're still my son. You have your own life. When I was alive, I was scared. People are always so afraid of dying. It's very natural. Everyone struggles to hold on, and the fear makes us petty." For the first time in decades, she'd seemed reasonable. He wondered whether death had made her wiser, given her more insight and perspective. He thought about things he should have said to her, that he was sorry for always getting on her case about not washing her hands and for pulling away when she tried to give him a kiss. He looked at his phone again and started scrolling through Instagram. He told himself he needed to stop stalking Marcus online, but he had the willpower of a gnat. Every day, he studied the photos of Marcus and his new boyfriend, Jerome, a Black guy who worked at Deutsche Bank and had been posting. Marcus and Jerome had flown to Santorini to celebrate someone's birthday. They'd arrived in Greece 6 days earlier and were island hopping for 2 weeks. Marcus kept posting photos of Jerome with his shirt off. Every day he posted stories featuring Jerome in his Speedos and his tank top and his flip-flops, with comments like lover boy and sexy dude, along with emojis that always made Stuart want to puke. That's it.
Yeah. So we've also prepared some questions for each other to ask, and then after that, we will open up questions for the audience if any of you guys have any. So
Maybe I'll start with a question for you, Jared.
sure, go for it.
I loved your story.
Thank you very
It
much.
was, I was on the edge of my seat. I mean, it could have gone a lot of different ways, right? So
Yes, very much so.
you could definitely imagine a different ending where, and who knows, maybe they will end up hooking up. Maybe he's not quite as straight as everybody thinks he is.
That's what they say. The difference between gay and straight is a six-pack, right? Isn't that what they say?
Exactly,
Yeah.
a little vodka.
Exactly.
So yeah, it was a great story. I mean, I one of the questions I have for you is, I haven't read all of your work, but I'm just curious about your, you are a queer writer. Are there benefits or downsides of writing queer fiction that you sort of think about?
Yes. So honestly, one of the benefits is, like I stated earlier, is to me, it's a sense of like regaining the agency that we have as queer people and telling our own stories. We've been misaligned often, various, depictions of ourselves untrue. I just want to be as open and honest as possible with the gay people and the queer situations that I write about, honestly. So that's certainly a downside. Again, is just reclaiming, that agency of ours to tell our own stories. One of the downsides, I guess, especially with a story like that is, or the one that I just read is, I think maybe somebody who already has a very kind of bad view of gay men as sexual predators to some hapless straight boy that's drunk on their couch, situation, they might take that and be like, see, they're writing about it themselves. They're, that kind of a thing, which I mean, I don't give too much thought to that because they're clearly not getting what I intended out of the story, but that still obviously it would be a downside of
Yeah.
that. That's just, writing about it themselves. They do that look,
Right.
so, yeah.
But he didn't do anything. He offered the guy a
Right.
couch, that's it.
Exactly.
He was
I
a
mean,
good guy.
hey, right, exactly. And a future place to stay.
He
Right.
showed a lot of restraint, I think.
Precisely. And I have some questions for you too, if I may.
Yeah.
So I've read the first couple of stories of your collection, and I really enjoy them. I'm really enjoying Heike very, very much. I enjoy the way that it kind of first of all, I love the way that the time shifts jump around, and I love that it's a novel in short stories. I've always been intrigued by doing that, but I honestly don't think I have the skill to do that. So that's amazing, and that impresses me immensely. So, but I know you've been working with Heike and Stuart as characters for a long time. They are the protagonists of your book, Outside is the Ocean, and which came out in 2017. And yet you still seem to be writing about these characters. I was wondering if you could talk about what draws you to these characters in particular. Is there a personal connection to these characters, but what keeps you returning to these characters?
I mean, it's a good question. I will be completely candid and straightforward and say there's a slight autobiographical element going on here. Surprise, surprise. You probably already gathered that. I think when I first started writing about my relationship with my mother, I saw it more as nonfiction than fiction. That was a long time ago. And I took a lot of workshops, and I got the same kind of comment repeatedly, which is that, the material's kind of interesting, but it needs to be structured and shaped. And like, I think I was pushed in the direction of trying to free myself from the actual events of my life and my relationship with my mother for the sake of making the art better and more interesting. So over time, I moved away from reality and into just kind of crafting fiction. And of course, those two characters still were central to sort of the work that I was doing because I had this strong emotional connection to their dynamic, and Heike in particular, trying to figure out what makes this woman tick and why does Stuart have the reactions that he does to her? Why does she push so many of his buttons? How should he be trying to respond to her and navigate these difficult situations? And the fiction was, I think, a way for me to kind of work through, it was a form of therapy, like to work through certain moments in my own life where I felt I had done the wrong thing. I felt guilty about my response. I felt like I wasn't the son I should have been, felt insanely frustrated by the relationship, things like that. And to be honest, after I published Outside is the Ocean, those desires did not go away. The relationship still caused me angst, and I still had more questions. And I think, I think that I am the kind of person who writes from a place of trying to work through, I think, a lot of my own personal issues and neuroses on the page. And so the relationship with my mother is probably the central thing in my life that keeps me up at night. And so I continue to work on stories related to it. Yeah. I have another question for you.
Sure, yes, absolutely.
So other than being a gay man, what compels you to include queer characters in your work?
So for me, honestly, one of the very first short stories I ever read many, many years ago that had a very, just, I guess, like just a very honest, open portrayal of a gay couple was a Clive Barker story. It's called In the Hills, the Cities. And it's just literally this normal, regular couple that just happen to be gay men. I mean, of course, they're faced with some horrific Clive Barker type shit, obviously. But other than that, though, but like nothing, no attention is drawn to the fact that they're gay men. No, it's not a big deal. It's just these are just the two people that happen to be in the story. And coming across something like that, honestly, at such a young age, was very crucial for me. It was, again, it kind of gave me an idea that you can write about non-stereotypical queer characters. They can just be these boring dudes that, just happen to stumble into this crazy crap, So that's always been something that's very important to me, is to kind of not just, speak on that, but to also kind of maybe hopefully provide an example of that for somebody coming up, that maybe they come across my book and they're like, wow, these people are, do some questionable things, but at least it's, not necessarily touching on a lot of the common stereotypes that a lot of people like to, touch on when they write queer fiction. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
And then my final question for you, if I may. So I, first of all, also wanted to compliment your amazing, amazing prose and your wonderful, wonderful attention to dialogue. That was very good. I really, really loved what you read. And as I talked about earlier, Outside is the Ocean is made up of stories, novel and stories rather. But it's also, a lot of it I've noticed is written in a realist vein. But the story that from your reading today it includes kind of, I guess, speculative elements of that. So why did you decide to shift gears and move into like a more speculative realm when so much of this is just, straight ahead fiction? So
Yeah. It's not something I really planned out. I think that after I finished Outside is the Ocean, and as I was just mentioning, I continued to sort of work through these issues with my mom and, what is the relationship between Stuart and Heike. Just because the book was published doesn't mean that I stopped thinking about them. And in a way, I feel like the characters were different, were not the same as myself and my mother. I did sort of have enough of a distance between the characters and the real people that I still thought about them. It's like, I wonder what Stuart would do, because Stuart wasn't exactly the same as I myself am. And there are times when I would push Heike into different or more extreme situations and reactions to things for artistic effect. And so I think this story that I was reading from today, where the mother has died and comes back from the dead, I think came out of a desire to figure out, Stuart at the end of Outside is the Ocean feels pretty terrible about, his mother has died and like the decisions he's made in his life and the way he's handled that relationship. And I wondered, if she comes back from the dead, is there a way that maybe their relationship could have a reset of some sort, or he could have a different perspective on kind of the decisions he made while she was alive. And so I have been working on a novel. This story is actually a part of it, where they both end up dying and going to heaven. Heaven is a very depressing sort of 1950s Soviet world that's full of brutalist architecture, and they are forced in that world to sort of have to forge an alliance to try to survive together. And so the book really does kind of look at how their relationship changes in these very different circumstances. On Earth, he's very prissy and worried about germs and worried about like, did that fork get washed properly? And in heaven, they're like focused on, are they going to like stay alive and like, be able to live and avoid getting, killed by guards. Yeah, so I've been having a lot of, it sounds strange to say I've been having fun with it because it is depressing in some ways, but it's been interesting to sort of see them in this very different landscape and set of circumstances. And yeah, I'm still having fun. I think the reason I write is just, to explore different options and opportunities. And I'm still having fun in it. So I keep on going until I run out of ideas and, momentum.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, again, I would like to thank you very, very much for reading with us. And so now we are going to open up questions. If anybody in the audience has a question that they would like to ask either of us, now is your opportunity.
Have you ever got to talk to your mom after? As like a in your being?
Talk to my mom after.
Forget.
Well, my mom is still alive.
I thought it was your personal story.
No. So I will twist the question a tiny bit. So yeah, my mom is still alive. That's all fiction. Like the book Outside is the Ocean that does have her die at the end, and this story where she's dead also. I read a lot about her death, even though she is very strong and very much alive still. Because I'm very focused on like, what is her death going to mean for me and how am I going to grapple with it and work through it emotionally. I will, just to, shift your question a tiny bit in a slightly different direction. I will say my mom has not read a lot of my writing about these characters. She's read a couple of the stories that are very flattering towards Heike, but I haven't told her about my book. And a lot of my friends had a very extreme reaction of like, she's gonna find out, like, are you crazy? And she hasn't found out. She doesn't spend a lot of time online. She doesn't have a robust social network. She's pretty elderly. If she does see this video at some point, Mom, I love you, and I'm really sorry that I didn't share it in a different way. But the book is really not a takedown of you. It is a very positive and loving portrait of Heike and of their relationship. But I don't think she's going to be so.
Very good. Any other questions?
I'll ask one for both of you.
Sure.
So about 100 years ago, I also studied writing, so I'm always curious to see that people come at it from very different angles or for very different reasons. So I'll ask kind of a general question. I'll let you both take it either direction you want. Like, what is your? I think I know the answer for yours. What's your source of inspiration? Was what I was going to ask. Or process. So talk about like inspiration or process. Like, what inspires you to do this, or how do you actually work through it?
Sure. You want to? Okay. Well, so I guess for me, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very queer positive household. So my mother is a very, very butch lesbian. So I was raised with nothing but honestly, like just, a positive reinforcement of being gay and being queer, which was wonderful. But in light of that, I also got to kind of see the ups and downs of, just of queer people, because we're just like everybody else. Some of us are great, some of us are just assholes, So I honestly, for me, I like to, I just feel like I kind of owe sort of like a debt to kind of just, again, making sure that everybody is represented, just very unapologetically, just, as openly and honestly as possible. I know I keep saying open and honest, I apologize, but that's kind of just the whole premise. And as far as my, like what inspires me to write, I always like to take situations that maybe like I'm thinking about or I hear from my friends, just and how would I react? I put myself in these situations and predicaments. It's like, what would I do? And sometimes I take it, you know, to an extreme. Sometimes it's what I would expect myself to do in it. So it's just, I don't know. I just have always enjoyed telling really good stories. So any subject matter that's a little, you know, left of center or something that might cause somebody, you know, to think, I like to explore that. That's important to me. So.
I think in terms of inspiration and process, yeah, I have written a lot of material that's inspired by this dynamic between myself and my mother, but not exclusively. I've written a lot of other things also. I think for me, it usually starts with just sort of a moment from my own life that is emotionally complicated in some way. Like I'll have a issue with a friend, or you know, there's an issue, a romantic issue that has occurred, whatever it is, and then as I'm thinking about it and stewing about it, or whatever the case is, I will sometimes try to think about, is there a way that this could be presented, or I could think about it on the page in a more extreme version or a slightly different version, like how would the characters work through it if A, B, and C weren't A, B, and C, but it was really like A, F, G, H, and R. And you know, you maybe start with what happened in reality, but you sort of shift things around for artistic effect and to almost sort of like let yourself live through a different version. And I find that by working through the different version, the artistic version, there is a catharsis for me. If I am, you know, originally inspired by something with a friend that's like a complicated, you know, misunderstanding or whatever, like by spending so many hours working through this sort of fictionalized version, whatever happened in real life feels much less powerful or important or, you know, consequential. So I'm like, well, all these people on the page like went through all this other stuff. I only had to deal with this. So, you know, yeah. So yeah, in terms of my process, I definitely do a lot of revision. I tend to write first drafts pretty quickly, but then I'll share the draft with readers and get comments and put it aside and make revisions. And so a story for me can sometimes take a really long time. But what's your process in terms of, do you sort of end up revising a lot, or how what's the lifespan of a story for you from like start to finish?
It really, honestly, that can vary. Some I've written in, like I've had a pretty solid draft come out in like maybe like a day or two, and then which didn't really need much revisions. But then there's some that I've spent 2 or 3 years working on, revising, editing, shortening, you know. So I would just honestly say it varies per story.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that when you have those moments where the story comes out kind of fully formed without a lot of pain,
right.
And you feel like it's pretty solid, it's like a gift.
I was going to say those are the good ones. Yes, exactly.
It's really rare,
right.
But it's an amazing thing that happens.
I always enjoy the process too, though, of editing and just kind of like really grappling with the words. So I'm old school. I write everything out by hand first.
Yeah.
On like just messy notebooks with many scratches, and this line belongs here. It looks like it's madness. But then I have to translate all that and type it out. So I do spend a lot of time with the story because I'm writing it basically twice.
Yes.
So as I'm typing it up, sometimes thoughts will come into my head and we can expand or contract in that manner.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just it depends, honestly, like you said.
Yeah.
So, but I really have always enjoyed. I like the short ones where they come out and it's a pretty quick deal. But I also really like spending a lot of time with the story and getting to know the characters and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Any other questions?
I have a question to Jerry.
Yes.
I recently noticed that alcohol and sex are killing the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
And not only the community, but the human being itself, the consciousness. And since that book is noticed with the alcohol and the sex, which I really appreciated. What are your thoughts on now this generation and this like cultural thing that's going on in the community?
That's actually a very good question. I Fortunately for me, I never have had an issue or like, you know, grappling with addiction or drugs and alcohol. I do come from a long line of alcoholics, so I'm very grateful that that skipped over me, honestly, because, you know, that could have been really horrible. That's a very good question. I've honestly noticed that with a lot of my younger friends, it seems like a lot of attention to drugs and alcohol really doesn't seem to be there. Like it seems like they're kind of just like, man, that's just what you people did back in the day because you're stupid, you know. So I'm positive, I would say that I think that, or at least I would hope that people are turning more away from that it's not being so much of a problem. But yeah, I do unfortunately write a lot about sex and drugs and alcohol, unfortunately. So I mean, that's just the generation that I'm from. That's what was very prevalent in the entertainment that I grew up reading, watching, that sort of thing. So that, and even just me growing up and like experiencing the gay culture in the 90s when I was coming of age, that was very much a thing. You know, you would go out to, you could still smoke in bars. So it was not uncommon to have a drink in this hand and balance it out with a cigarette, you know. So I'm glad people are getting away from that. I certainly hope it's something that continues, honestly. So, I mean, I will still have the occasional drink. I'm not a teetotaler or anything, but yeah, I mean, just everything in moderation, I suppose, including sex and alcohol. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Good.
Thanks for coming.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you both. And there are copies of the book.